I guess it's a bit crickets right now, but hello ETHDenver. I wanted to present the findings of a workshop we had at Vitalia City last month on the evolution of organizations. My name is Ramona. I am a lawyer. I am based in the Cayman Islands, and I'm also one of the co-founders of ETHDenver, a law as technology enabling human collaboration firm. Based on our preliminary discussions, we have a few new areas of research, and essentially, this is what I wanted to present today. I'll start by giving credit where credit is due. So this was co-created during the Vitalia pop-up city. They're still having fun over there. I just came to ETHDenver. But everybody's like pretty much already there. It's been prolonged for the month of March. This is one of the pop-up cities that has been currently getting funding via the new Gitcoin round, along with Edge City, which is happening in Denver right now. So, summary findings, I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity that Vitalia presented in terms of putting together lawyers, engineers, biotech people, and then thinking about DAOs in terms of a classification of DAOs is needed and what would be a bioscientist's approach. So from personal research, I know that traditionally everybody is writing about DAOs, but there are just very few classifications that matter. The two axes that I've encountered in the literature are fully automated versus participatory DAOs. And then, depending on the DAO mission, there could be additional classifications, protocol services, investment grants, etc. And then I started thinking from a biologist perspective, you know, animal aggregation has been going on for quite some time, right? And then scientists started to explore and learn more about it, again, for quite some time. So in terms of the patterns that we're seeing in nature, what if we started to look at the patterns and emergent properties of DAOs as systems? So what are DAOs really? They're open systems, first of all, right? So there's like these free-floating entities in the ether. People can come and go. They could join. They can. Some of the decisions are automated. Some of them are not really. And then, like we see patterns emerging when we start looking at the DAO. So like in protocol DAOs, we have more automation. But there are plenty of DAOs that are really participatory aggregation of humans. I've been in quite a few. As a lawyer from the traditional space, I started with LexDAO, the Legal Engineering Guild, and then moved to R&D DAO for research and development and, you know, teaching and training people. And finally, metagame is one of my favorites. So, but I looked into other DAOs as in terms of research. I poked in around. I got dragged on a few boards of directors for legal wrappers for DAOs, or got dragged into acting as a consultant for this type of projects. So I've seen quite a few patterns. Sorry. So first of all, the first pattern that we're seeing is the swarm pattern. And what I realized by talking to people in DAOs is that there is sometimes there is not enough of an exploration of the concept of a swarm. So the formation of swarms in biology is one of the manifestations of the so-called active matter, self-propelled individuals that form a whole. It can be a swarm or a flock, as we saw in the previous slide. It can be bacteria in motion, it can be cells in the body, it can be artificial systems. The mathematical model, which is used to model these swarm-like behaviors, has been established since 1995. And it shows that there is a phase transition from a disordered motion to a large-scale ordered motion. Essentially, chaos turns into harmony. Now, this applies to humans as well, in particular as DAOs and social experiments. So From what I can see and from my perspective, DAOs are more like corporate and social experiments in human aggregation. Two recent articles that could be useful to check out if you are liking the math, or I put the references down below. I'm happy to share the slides. Essentially, this is a interesting phenomenon because we are seeing emergence of new forms of human aggregation at much larger scale than previously encountered, and with different forms as well. So if we think about the swarm as a working DAO model, we realize that swarms work really well with a great number of DAO members who are relatively at the same level of skills and involvement. If groups are not homogeneous, then there is a risk of leveling down to the lowest denominator. This has been seen traditionally in many environments previous to DAOs. Scientific studies of swarm-like behavior in animals are quite numerous and informative. In a swarm of bees, for example, a few individuals collectively inform behavior by moving faster than their neighbors, who are simply playing follow the leader. Let's connect this with the social engineering and consumer behaviorism as well. In ant colonies, large complex behaviors are coordinated via very simple rules. In great numbers, this results in self-organized systems which are dynamic and establish emergent properties from the nonlinear combination of interactions. These are density-dependent interactions. The more packed together a crowd is, a herd or a flock or a swarm, the more interactions and the more different patterns emerge. So we have four key features of these open systems. These are coordination, cooperation, decision-making, and collaboration. And then the patterns that are formed in the animal world are both resilient and flexible, but scientists still don't understand why this happens. There is a lot of speculation in terms of the reasoning behind it. Could be protection of the weaker animals from predators, or there is another speculation that is really optimizing foraging, and it's actually an adaptation. But if we look at examples from nature, we see that depending on the type of animal, on the species of animal, their patterns are quite different. And this is an important thing to remember, because the summary finding number 2 that we had in our workshop was that decentralized organizations need supporting systems for their members, which can include onboarding, maintaining momentum, and adjusting for personal style of work and type of contribution. People are not the same. Our patterns are different. And it may be an unpopular opinion, but for swarms not to sacrifice people for the greater good, an understanding of individual patterns and necessary supporting systems are key. So let's think about the different forms of DAOs. If a person spends, I don't know, a small percentage of their time acting as a node validator, that's fine. The system wouldn't shape him or her. If a person becomes a full-time DAO contributor in several DAOs, which have a similar pattern, then he or she becomes a full-time member in a certain system, which shapes behavior, which shapes mindset. We are transformed with every interaction. This discussion that we're having right here, this interaction that we're having, changes things. Every interaction that we have in an established system changes us, right? The more frequent, the more numerous interactions, the more we are changed by that. So I wanted to suggest an alternative working DAO model as the pride. If DAOs can have different models because the patterns of the people, of the DAO contributors are different, then nature has many examples of teamwork and emerging properties resulting from aggregation, even if this is less statistically impressive. For example, lions hunt as a team. They pursue big game, they study their prey, and they decide on a strategy. They delegate roles and then maintain discipline. Clearly, there is a very different pattern here. There is also a much smaller size. So perhaps a taxonomy of DAOs would be useful, and this was the conclusion of our bioscientist participants, is like, we have to know what we're dealing with. Summary finding number 3. There is a need for both commitment, ensuring that stuff gets done, and just rewards, contributions, not promises. From personal experience, again, I'm a lawyer, I live in the Cayman Islands. Lots of DAOs rely on service providers. This is not a very decentralized approach, and it implies a potential strategic risk. It depletes the treasury, and the members don't learn. So I hope that my fellow service providers from the Cayman Islands won't get too upset about this, but my personal opinion is that community should actually do its own work. The DAO management gap in communities is something I've established, again, when I did my research. Community management is not the same as training and leveling up DAO members, equality of members. And even what is a quality member in a DAO? Do DAOs actually ask this question? Or some of them do, obviously, but I believe that Web3 requires a great deal of personal agency and integration. In a way, participating in these open systems forces evolution. People are forced to adapt to a new way of interacting. They are forced to take more initiative and become more resilient. Summary finding number 4. We already have the tools to give legal personality to a smart contract operating pool of assets and liabilities. But obviously, simply slapping together a legal wrapper is not the way. Again, I'm a lawyer. Legal wrapper is a little bit like that kitten there. It's the DAOs making use of legal wrappers need to understand how a legal wrapper actually works, right? And I would prefer to call it a legal container. Many DAOs are actually like sieves. I call it Web3 life cultures. There is a lot of talent. There is a lot of value. There is a lot of innovation, lots of ideas. However, the lack of containers in which value can accrue and grow is prejudicial to building up and growing, right? So legal containers are actually a useful thing to have. But then, again, please understand how they work. The DAOs need to adjust and tie their consensus mechanism into the corporate governance of the legal wrapper. This is critical because otherwise, what will happen in practice is that in a court of law, the judge would look, it's like, okay, so you have a legal wrapper, you have an independent board of directors, you have no interactions whatsoever with them, despite, like, except one meeting a year. Members are still responsible for the things they do. When I did research in November, so I had the opportunity in November to publish a paper on the risks in DAOs, risk taxonomy for DAOs. And I think that one of the main differences between the traditional risk management space in the corporate world and the DAOs is that DAOs have an additional category of risk, which is risk for DAO participants. This normally doesn't happen in a traditional organization because you're either an agent, an employee, or you're a director and officer with liability insurance. So essentially, becoming a DAO participant without a contract in place with a legal wrapper is exactly the same as being a DAO participant in a DAO which has no legal wrapper. It really depends. You're responsible for your own actions as a multi-sig key holder, for example. So again, please understand how things work. This may be hard. This may be hard because some of the pushback that I'm getting, and this is what happened during the Pythagora workshop when we had this discussion, was that DAOs prefer to remain outside the legal system. It's like tunnels of reality. Legal system is one tunnel of reality, and then DAOs and blockchain is another tunnel of reality. However, if we play by statistics, the tunnel of reality that is the legal system is still much bigger and wider. So essentially, DAOs would eventually interact with traditional legal systems. So they can be prepared for it, they can evolve into it, or they can just remain on the fringes. Personally, the hero's journey is not complete if you remain on the fringes. You can find your treasure, but if you don't bring it back to the mainstream, it's sort of wasted potential. And you can get upset at me and have this discussion afterwards or ask me questions. It's like I'm perfectly happy to be, unpopular on this. Summary finding number 5. Common law works very well with decentralization. Bad law does not propagate, but regulations, the administrative state, need trimming and weeding. I think we are aligned here. We are on the same page. Common law is at heart decentralized. Its 2 core pillars in the United States, for example, are respect for judicial precedent and fundamental human rights. Again, traditionally, in the United States, law and precedent were used to constrain governmental power, not the other way around. And then a famous definition of James Wilson, which is part of the American founding, is law is the perfection of reason through experience, so that whatever is not reasonable cannot be the law. So yes, I am a lawyer. I live in the Cayman Islands. I am also qualified in the US and other jurisdictions. So I did study this thing, and I did study common law. Summary finding number 6. Effective organizations do not just emerge, they evolve. Design greatly improves speed of innovations. So learning from nature has been the way to the greatest human discoveries in history. Recently, scientists have found that evolution in nature is not random. Previously, we all thought that, it's just a bunch of random things happening, and then whoever has an evolutionary advantage will survive and propagate. But actually, it was found by research on the DNA that critical functions are protected from variation, ensuring more stability, whereas other areas are more open to experimentation, which ensures evolution. So what are the essential frameworks and critical structures that should be protected, and what should be open to experimentation? And my invitation here is actually think about DAOs as experiments in the evolution of organizations, in all organizations, right? So human aggregation models and the DAOs as experiments of human aggregation models can actually teach a lot of lessons and help traditional organizations evolve into more decentralized, more resilient, more democratic structures. Summary finding number 7. Seeding works best, a minimum viable framework and the curation filtering of the layers of membership. So I'm quoting Michael Zargham here, the founder of Block Science, who introduced the concept of minimal viable commons, based on the idea that communities create shared resources or commons, knowledge, infrastructure, financial resources that are collectively owned or managed for the benefit of their members. And then the minimum viable commons is the smallest possible set of shared resources necessary for a community to function and thrive. Now, it depends on what you mean by community, because we all know that communities can be various sizes and shapes. But at Vitalia, we actually had a chance of observing the benefit of curation and the filtering of participants around certain common themes, allowing an emergence of certain forms of collaboration among peer groups which share values and mission. So the key words here, they're not emphasized there in the slide, but it's peer groups, so relatively same level, and then shared values of mission. There is some alignment there. There is some overlap so that people can effectively work together. I feel that this is really missing in many DAO-type projects. It's starting to take shape, but it's a very, very slow process. Summary finding number 8. Applying principles of contract law to decentralized organizations can result in a graphic representation of the nexus of contracts. Could help understand better design structures. So this is essentially about vector modeling peer-to-peer interactions over time, which could allow us to observe and inventory the various shapes and forms of DAOs and have a greater understanding of how decentralization really works. We could consider adding artificial intelligence to the nexus of contracts and bring about an evolution of DAOs as true cybernetic organism. I believe that there is a bunch of research papers out of China that were talking about the integration of digital humans in DAOs, and there's also some initiatives calling for Borgs, etc. I would personally recommend that you check out the Theo Jansen's wind-powered new forms of life. He calls them strand beasts. It's essentially wind-powered structures. It's containers that hold shape. They are moved by the wind, but they are structure built in such a way that they hold their form. So DAOs ideally could evolve in a form that would hold its shape. And then humans could be the wind, the spirit. Summary finding number 9. In multicellular organisms, cell structures do not have to be the same. So I will, we're getting towards the end of the summary findings and into more of the meat of the discussion regarding potential evolutions and potential structures for DAOs. The idea is that DAO members are not similar, and forcing them in the same swarm-like patterns is not beneficial, since the law of the lowest denominator applies. For DAOs to evolve and compete with organizations, they have to become true multicellular organisms with the more complex organizations. That means as legal containers, so think about legal structures as legal containers, right? Like membranes of a cell. And they can be stacked together in various, like in a variety of cell structures. Well, it's very difficult to do that when, you know, a legal structure in the Cayman Islands could cost you like a legal stack in the Cayman Islands with foundation company on top, some entities in the middle, a token issuer in the bottom, a token operating entity, et cetera, et cetera. It could rack up to 50 grand a year, not even talking about, you know, local directors or anything like that. So that's very difficult to do. However, legal innovation is also about, like, for regard, like LexDAO is, like, has been working on a project called KaliDAO with Ricardian LLCs, where you can have those cell-type structures spawn off very easily. But Vitalia is in like Prospera special economic zone, where we are sort of pioneering new forms of legal entities which are more cost effective, for example. So essentially in many jurisdictions, and this will happen all over the world, in certain countries, legal structures are really very, very not expensive, right? It takes a couple of hours to set up a legal entity, cost a few $100s. Stable, diverse cells, including a 360 degree skill set, are great for stability in decision-making, strategy and risk management, and holding the DAO mission. This is based on the premise that diversity provides a lot of value, and then you can group together in this sort of stable cell people who have different personalities, different skill sets, different angles, and that they would bring together a very full picture. This comes directly from the teachings that we do have as part of the board governance, right? The best rules for the governance of the listed companies, blah, blah, blah. Essentially, skill sets are complementary. Grouping together people with complementary skill sets allows you to form a very stable shape. And then you can plan for succession, right? You can have succession planning and skills management and ensure that structure is accruing. However, that in itself is not enough. Those cells are like the board of directors, they're heavy, they're sort of very stable, but they're also very slow. And they need to reach consensus, and reaching consensus when you have different perspectives and points of view is very hard. So you could also alternate those with breakthrough agile cells that include DAO members as a small working group evolving together at much greater speed. You group them together by skill set or by personality, or like, potentially building in a dissolution date linked to mission and budget. And then you have those hunter-seeker vehicles that are really, really very effective at like going there and acting on the world, seeking new opportunities or building things. And then you can deprecate them. It's like in a very much similar way, again, learning from nature, like the human body renews itself periodically. Blood cells, I think it's 40 days. So like other types of cells is like a longer period of time. But essentially, change in itself, it's not threatening the survival of the bigger organism. So this brings us to the working DAO model that I personally like, which is the mothership. So this could be an example of a complex aggregation with legal containers, where you have your traditional legal wrapper, Cayman Foundation company on top, or there are other jurisdictions that are having foundation companies. I'm not trying to sell Cayman. It is the best jurisdiction, in my personal opinion, but I'm also based there, and I understand that it's not for everyone. But essentially having that type of orphan entity on top as a mothership, it serves to house shared resources for a community of sub-DAOs, or even a hunter-seeker fleet of LLC DAO participants that are evolving at different speeds and for different activities. Essentially, you could have even variable participation in that, DAO participant legal fleet. And this is different from pure swarm type models, which treat everybody the same, but it's possible to have some of the same benefits, right? While allowing for more variety in terms of DAO participants, activities, and patterns. So the mothership structure would also allow for a mechanism to compensate for the current management and strategy gap in DAOs. Why do I say that DAOs have a management and strategy gap? So I know that a lot of DAOs are big believers in the regulating power of the markets and a pricing mechanism, and that is true for the current needs. However, management and strategy is not just about meeting current needs. And especially in strategy, there are different layers of strategy. Imagine like one of the more popular concepts in strategy is blue ocean strategy, right? It's like you're moving away from the red ocean filled with sharks, what everybody's competing, prices get down. You're moving into new territory. You're building your own product, your own line of product. You're meeting needs that the consumers or clients didn't know they have. That cannot be achieved by market coordination. It's impossible, right? It's not how markets work. Therefore, you need to have this sort of research and development unit or strategy unit as part of the DAO to be able to move into those territory. And those people would not provide value on the very short-term basis. I think this is the biggest danger of DAOs, is like I see a lot of similarities between DAOs and listed companies, both in terms of types of risk, like voter apathy, like burnout, decision-making burnout, and so on, but also in terms of being skewed to focus on the short-term or mid-term versus the long-term game, right? The very long-term game. It's not true for every DAO, right? It depends on the quality of the DAO vision and the leadership, but there's always a risk that DAOs have to manage between the risk of centralization, so leadership is a little bit too active, a little bit too focused, and decentralization, where you sort of like dissipate, or lose form, lose shape. So there is also this dance. There is always this dance that DAOs have to manage between centralization and decentralization. And then not everything. I know that again, this may be a very unpopular opinion, but not everything can be decentralized in the same way. Think about a hospital. I wouldn't want to go to a hospital that works in a decentralized fashion, at least not in the current state of things. So being more reasonable and being a bit more pragmatic, like visionary realism should be a thing in terms of how we build the structures, would allow DAOs to manage their resources a bit better, I think, and also become a bit more competitive, because the key to DAOs actually gaining the upper hand and then becoming more competitive towards traditional organizations is in reducing transaction costs. So, and then we move to the final summary finding that we have, is that we need to find a good way to track emergence. So I am what, according to one definition of Balaji in the network state, could be called a normie, as sort of like I'm part of the existing systems. It's like I'm a very good fit. Like, you know, in the existing systems, I'm a lawyer, I'm sitting on boards, I sort of very much in it from a traditional perspective, and yet I'm here. This is because I see opportunity in this movement, in these DAOs that are social and corporate experiments. I sense the emergence of a new form of aggregation at the human level, and the emergence of group consciousness. And then also some of the innovations that DAOs do have, and some of the DAO tools that the DAOs do build with automation and blockchain could be very, very beneficial to our other larger communities, like cooperatives, for example. They have like about 12% of GDP. Platform cooperatives are the most similar to DAOs I have ever seen, and those entities could greatly benefit from the DAO tooling. They also could teach DAOs a lot of things in terms of human issues and human coordination. But to get to the point, for DAOs to become an attractive alternative to traditional organizations, transaction costs need to be dramatically reduced. The investment of time needed for a potential DAO participant like me to maintain involvement is effectively a moat preventing most people from working with DAOs, because there is such a thing as an opportunity cost. If my time is better spent doing other things, I would not go and get involved in a DAO, even though my contribution could be very beneficial to that project, right? So this is the well-known problem of user experience in Web3, but tracking emergence in DAOs is part of this. I've had this conversation. There are a lot of tools out there that are built for community management, enabling the people managing the community to see where the discussion happens, who are the hot topics, who are the more active participants. However, that also has a great potential of being misused for social engineering purposes. So I argue that it should be open to the participants on the other side, to DAO participants, for them to be able to track what's happening in the DAO, where their input would be appreciated, needed, useful, and then allowing them to keep track without spending all their time in coordination calls or trying to catch up on the Discord server. So again, artificial intelligence could help with this. Moment to moment, the DAO landscape evolves at great speed compared to traditional organizations. And then, like even traditional organizations, if you think about schools of project management and all those evolutions in terms of like the Agile and the Scrum and this and that, it happened because of the need to improve coordination and management between humans, right? So for swarms to work, coordination needs to happen in real time. And arguably, this does happen in automated DAOs where it's about protocol and the rules. It does not happen in participatory DAOs, which are the greater number, I would argue, but it is to be seen. Without the taxonomy of DAOs, without the pure classifications, we don't really know. So I would like to open the floor to some questions or comments if people want to, at this point, if people want to interact or ask any questions. Like it could be ask me anything. I can talk about foundation companies DAOs. Otherwise, I will just move on to explain a bit of what could be done. Yes, there is a mic, I believe.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for your patience. I have a question about this particular slide. So what do you think AI could be used? Could you please elaborate more on that? To facilitate.
So AI could be used for?
In this particular context, to facilitate, let's say, more adoption or just collaboration between human participants.
And AI.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so what initially drew my attention to this when I did the initial research on risk management in DAOs and what was the state of things. So risk management in DAOs is a very siloed approach. It reminded me to the practices of risk management that had evolved in a very early stage when it was still a sort of a only financial risk or only security risk or only this type of risk. Now, enterprise risk management is a holistic approach to risk management in an organization, founded on the understanding that risk is uncertainty, not just loss, but also opportunity, and therefore risk needs to inform strategy. So looking through the papers, the research papers in terms of risk management and DAO structures and what was out there, I found a couple of papers of Chinese scientists that were talking about the potential of using digital humans in DAOs. And that is a very interesting proposition. First of all, it raises the question of digital humans and what type of rights should they have, right? It's like if it's AI, if it's bots, it's like what recognition, what legal recognition would they have? Because right now they would be considered assets, right? And I would doubt that there would be any country out there who would be willing to give legal rights and protection to AI. It just would not happen. At least not at this stage. So how could DAOs actually employ artificial intelligence in a very intelligent way? I've seen it happen in terms of smaller DAO bots used to summarize, so track emergence in a way, summarize chats in a Telegram group across multiple channels. Or there is a project like Artem is not here, but I may mention Harmonica as part of R&D DAO Ventures in terms of tracking what actually happens in DAOs and in terms of communities, right? So there are lots of projects out there which can track interactions between people. That is known. And the output can be more or less visible to the public or to DAO participants, but essentially that would be a service. Now, if we want to go beyond that and consider, never mind. If we want to go beyond that and consider how artificial intelligence's digital humans could become part of DAOs, it all depends on the programming, right? It all depends on what they are trained to do and what they are able to do. I would not trust large language models to do much because it's not very precise, but there are other AI models out there that are being developed. So I would not exclude the future where, and then actually one of my co-founders should be here to talk about this because he's the one into permissionless AI. But essentially you could consider that AI could maintain, right? Like thinking about those structures that maintain their shape, and then where humans are simply providing the wind or the spirit and inspiriting those entities, AI could be provided, could be used to provide that glue that keeps the shape and provide certain running maintenance services along certain parameters, right? So that would be possible use of AI in DAOs. And I do think it would not be threatening if done in such a way. And then again, if you think about legal structures as really being legal containers that protect certain things, right? There are legal containers that are holding assets and liabilities. AI could be part of the assets protected in such a legal container, and therefore, if it ties into an ownerless foundation type structure that is linked to a DAO, it could be argued that AI does not belong to anyone. It's not, owned by anyone, as opposed to what is happening with other projects where there are commercial interests, there are other considerations. But again, this is like very early stages. But thank you for the question. Yes? Spencer, thank you.
Hi, yeah, I'm great presentation. I'm really curious about the mothership model that you mentioned, and I know we've talked a little bit about it at LexDAO, but I'm curious if you've come across any arrangements like this in the wild where you can have almost like a membership body, but they all have individual legal wrappers? Would something like that function in certain cases?
Yeah, so the mothership idea came because we were brainstorming in terms of what would be some good ways to help grassroots projects that are really good projects that deserve to exist. With their legal needs and their legal structures, taking advantage of potentially not everybody can afford a full stack with a foundation company on top and then several subsidiaries and then local directors and then law firms and so on. So we were thinking, what about doing the Y Combinator of DAOs, right? Like essentially providing some really, really good training materials, good practices, generating that inside of a Cayman Islands foundation company to be used as a mothership for certain types of projects. Some projects deserve their own legal structure simply because they are much riskier than others. I would not put decentralized finance projects in such a sort of an incubator mothership with the simple, creative, grassroots projects, right? But if grouping together projects by area has taught us anything, is that they could rather benefit from economies of scale. So we saw this at Vitalia. I was there just for a week, but then again, like many of the others were there for 2 months already and then going on the 3rd month now. You can see that people are working along the same lines. They're working on projects that are similar, that could benefit from synergies, that could learn from each other. As a lawyer, I sort of started as a traditional lawyer, and then I got out and started my own company to fully focus on digital assets and how they could transform the world. And then I got like, oh, this is interesting. From project consulting, I could build this. This one is interesting. I would be interested to build this one. And then turned into sort of a venture studio of things. And now, thinking of law as legal technology enabling, like law as technology enabling human collaboration, like this is something I can get behind. And again, some projects deserve to be helped, whereas other projects have the funds to provide the resources so that some open goods can be created. LexDAO, for example, has law as a public good. Law should be a public good. People should not have to pay a fortune just to learn what their legal obligations are and what they are allowed to do. So again, the mothership is like having this incubator. It could reduce costs. Having some eligibility criteria would enable synergies to be created between projects and collaborations. And again, the idea is not to get them to compete with each other, but to get them to support each other. And then in the bear market, this is what we saw a lot, is that projects who had more funding supported those who had the developers, and sort of everyone survived. Do we have any more questions at this point? I could pitch the DAO incubator anytime, but I appreciate the interactions. The Pythagora workshop was actually a co-creation, so this is why I'm so keen on interaction.
Yeah, hello.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for the keynote. That's awesome. I'm actually looking into this part as well, and I've been part of LidoDAO and some others, so I know this pain and struggle. What I'm curious about is whether you see and believe that it's possible, or maybe observed some examples of having an extraterritorial form of existence of a digital company. So with no wrapper, with no container, nothing, just a pure digital entity, which is still legitimate.
Right. So this turns out, so this is a question about whether a DAO without a legal wrapper or legal entity attached to it can just be a digital entity fully on chain and still survive. And this turns us back to that moment where I talk about the tunnels of vision, the tunnels of reality. Right now, we are in a tunnel of reality which is based on the legal fiction that actually gives certain people certain rights and obligations, and then it has agreed that certain incorporated artificial entities deserve to have rights and obligations, and that authority comes from the state, from them being approved by the state. So initially it happened with the monarchy, and then and the king chartering them, and then or the state, and now it's the state. So it's linked to a political authority, to a sovereign territory that could actually grant that. So in this vision of the world, based on fragmented reality, where country by country by country, they have different rules and they have different rights and chartering different entities, that is like not easy to do. The participants would take the risk. I mean, it can be done, honestly, if the purpose of the DAO is more like a club, they're not doing anything which is particularly risky or should be regulated if done as a business. It's like, really, they could. However, they are running risks because in most countries, they will be established as a sort of a partnership, right? So they will become indefinitely liable for what the others are doing, which is not something we want. So to move forward without this, we could see two potential paths, right? We could see a path where countries agree that each DAO participant is responsible for their own doing. We could see a path where each DAO participant creates its own LLC, their own LLC, and they operate via that, and it's like, that's that. However, the benefit of DAOs ultimately is that they are allowing people to aggregate across national borders, right? They are allowing people to work peer-to-peer across national borders in a transnational way. So this is the most direct path, I believe, towards having a global, a planetary society, a planetary civilization. And as the DAOs, I see DAOs as pioneers of this sorts of experiments of new ways of work, so that to allow people to cross these country boundaries. Any activities, any human activities is risky, right? But again, we turn back to risk is uncertainty. Risk is not loss. Risk is uncertainty. It can be loss, but it can also be gain, right? So to the extent that the activity of the DAO in question would not raise particular issues which would be very threatening to an existing country or established system, it could be done, I believe. I wouldn't, as a lawyer, I wouldn't necessarily advise it because of the risk associated for the DAO participants, but it really depends. If it's just a club, it's like you don't need to incorporate. It's like you're not doing anything which could expose you to real liability risk individually, right? So this is why it's so difficult for regulators to grasp DAOs, and it's so difficult for regulators to actually determine a regime that would be applicable to all DAOs. It's just not possible, right? These entities need to be classified according to their own patterns and traits, because we're talking about an entire ecosystem of very different species coexisting under the name of DAOs. One other thing I would say is that personally with Ixion, one of my reasoning behind joining this new law firm about building law as legal technology is that we want to build, I see regulations as waves of the ocean, right? As they're coming and going, and there's no way for me to control what politicians are doing, where politics are, and it makes a lot of wasted efforts to try to build based on that. And it annoys me a lot when I see law firms publishing, this regulator did that and that regulator did that. It's like, okay, but that is part of the administrative state. Really, we should be building for the world we want to have, not building based on what the regulations currently are, but build based on where we want the regulations. So good enough, look at the FATF, look at the international standards that are being developed across industries, across countries, build a good enough model based on that so it holds in most jurisdictions, and then just go with that, right? Because if we have a good enough model that's being built to work in several countries, the marginal risk that there would be an enforcement action based on the difference, the smaller difference that we could not cover on the global level, it's relatively low. So that's a manageable risk, right? It's like, it's a much better risk. So of course, it doesn't mean that build without any rules, but build with the rules of the world that we want to have, where like people are not scammed or rugged or whatever, right? Yeah. Any other questions? We still have some time. Yes?
First of all, a little too close. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I love the biological aspect to it. And I had a question on that kind of follows nicely from the last one. We speak of evolution and the concept of phylogenetic trees. And there's a point where you separate and two communities are no longer able to interbreed between them. Sometimes it feels like we're at an inflection point. Do you see that with the state of DAOs and legacy corporations, that in the future you choose one or the other? Or do you think that it will be retroactive and possible that way?
Corporations are a fiction. So thank you for the question. The question was about the phylogenetic trees and whether DAOs are just a different strand versus corporation, and it's about having a choice, one versus the other. No, because corporations are artificial creations. It's like Bitcoin proved that money is whatever we make of it, right? So the same way we can choose the rules of the game for corporations, we can also have a lot of flexibility in terms of creating new corporations. So lawyers would know this, but the LLC, which is a very popular traditional corporate structure, was very recently created in the United States, and it was mostly due to the efforts of the American Bar Associations, and there were like other efforts, because people were finding the corporation, the traditional corporation, to be too heavy, and they wanted a smaller, leaner vehicle that they could use that would ensure that they had limited liability always, but a little bit more flexibility in terms of how they operated. So this got created, and then once a state created it, the others picked up on it because, of course, they were like fear of missing out in terms of like people going over there and incorporating into that. So and we're experimenting with corporations and corporate entity structures all the time. The foundation company in the Cayman Islands, which is so popular for DAOs right now, actually has been created in 2017. This is very recent, and it has been created because people were complaining that they wanted the trusts, but they didn't want the trustees. So they liked the concept of a trust, of separating a certain pocket of assets of liabilities and putting them together, right, and separating them from their own, assets and liabilities. But they didn't want to go to a trustee, that a professional. They had no idea who there was. Or it was very cumbersome, or it was very difficult for them to work with. So they wanted a company that they could manage more directly. The regulator, being very pragmatic in the Cayman Islands, was like, okay, let's create a foundation company structure, which is a cross between a company, a real commercial company, and trust. And it works. In the European Union, there was a failed experiment of a European company that was created that was meant to encourage companies across the European Union to incorporate in a common form that would actually have rights all over the European Union. It's not very popular. People don't know about it, but it exists. In Canada, we're seeing right now the development of the public good corporations with certain other rules. So it's like corporate structures evolve and create new all the time. And then depending on the evolution of corporate structures, some of them would simply disappear and become a statistics in history, or they would continue to be used if they are still useful, if there are still people buying into them, right? So I see DAOs as a potential alternative to corporations, maybe, but I think it's more likely that DAOs will change how corporations actually work in practice. I think that's a much more beneficial way of thinking about the future, because DAOs bring certain advantages in terms of enabling people, to empowering people, having more consensual agreements, not so much power over another and buying someone else's time, but actually collaborating together to a future. And I think a lot of people in the traditional business world and traditional corporations would like that, right? In a very similar way, people in the United States, for example, there are companies in the United States that are owned by their employees. Like their founders, actually, when they retired, they just gave all the stock away to their employees. It doesn't mean that those companies are managed in a decentralized fashion, but they are owned by their employees, right? They still have their managers and then hierarchies and whatever, but from a beneficial ownership standpoint, it's changed something for people. So there are various, I would say that the natural world is the best way to learn. Looking in the natural world, the more diverse forms we have, the better we are, the more resilient we are. And it should be the same for corporations and for organizations and way of structuring. One of the seminal works in the corporate space is actually the founder's mentality. It was a study done by people from Bain & Company, and then they studied the more successful corporations, and they discovered that those corporations are still managed by the founders. They still had that ethos of the founders, that vision of the founders, very close to how they operated. This was what made them successful. So in terms of finding those elements that would bring enough of a good change, and then putting them, linking them with a set of tooling and automation and blockchain, it would really make a great impact. From my personal perspective, I studied, so I got dragged on a few boards of directors, and I was uncomfortable, like, lawyer, okay, what do I know? So let's go, do some courses. Very gender, I guess, women's perspective on things. If I don't know everything, I'm not comfortable. But essentially, I went and I looked, and I find like a lot of good practices evolved in the set of governance, strategy, risk management. And then I thought, like, what about if we could make them work in a decentralized way, embed them in some DAO tooling, and then they will for sure get implemented. And that would be wonderful, because most public companies, most corporations right now only talk about those things. They don't necessarily have them implemented everywhere. It's very hard to implement something in the operations. But if it's embedded in the tooling, then it gets done, right? So this is my interest and my perspective on DAOs, and this is why I'm interested in DAOs, and this is why I'm sort of like spending my time here or in various DAOs. And then just for a bit of a shill, you can find them in LexDAO, R&D DAO, and Metagame, and then Jupyter Block and Discord. We still have 4 minutes, but I think I'm personally done. Thank you so much.